With YaYa Diaby out with injury, who is going to rise to the occasion? That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this live episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listener review every single day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at @Yarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering your Tampa Bay Buccaneers as deputy editor of SB Nation's BucsNation.com. Here with you every Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As the playoffs have wound down, the sports stop sportsing like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. A mailbag episode coming up for you, as I've had some really good questions roll in, including who I think the most overrated and underrated players in the NFL are. All of that is coming up in a little bit, but let's start with some of the big news from Thursday, and that is, of course, YaYa Diaby's high ankle sprain. We talked about it a little bit on yesterday's show with Evan Klosky, but it's still something that could have a ripple effect for the Buccaneers going into the regular season. Todd Bowles was asked about the injury and said, quote, "He has a sprained ankle. We'll monitor it. He should be ready for week 1. We'll take him week by week as he goes and kind of go from there. He avoided a serious injury. As a coach, you try not to overreact, but you can see the cart come out there and you've just got to wait and see." Then we got good news, so that worked out for the best, end quote. He was then asked about which player is in position to take advantage of those reps that are vacated by Diaby, and Bowles was pretty blunt. The answer was all of them. And that really tied perfectly into a mailbag question that I got from Insider Stu, who asked, with YaYa out until possibly week 1, who do you think will show out and bring their name into the light during preseason and the rest of camp? Who is your thought on the best possible backup? Well, Stu, great question. I see you in the chat as you're getting ready to head off for a wedding. Hope everything goes well. Hope it's a great time. Congrats to the happy couple. But we know there's Joe Tryon-Shoyink out there, and he kind of is what he is at this point. He needs to have a really big season if the Bucs are going to bring him back, considering they did not pick up his 5th-year option. He is in a contract year. And then there's Anthony Nelson. Evan mentioned him on yesterday's show, and he's kind of in the same vein, right? You know what his ceiling is, and while he's a good player and a solid rotational piece, he's not going to all of a sudden go out there and get you double-digit sacks. Randy Gregory is a complete non-factor because the dude is a ghost at this point. So my attention turns to rookie Chris Braswell. This is a chance for Braswell to kind of do what Diaby did last year and emerge as a potential factor in his rookie season. He's already a rotational guy behind Diaby and JTS, probably in the mix behind Anthony Nelson, was probably going to be kind of along the same lines in playing time as Randy Gregory was going to be. But now he has the chance to start getting more reps and getting more opportunities to improve and refine his game at the NFL level. And we've talked about it before. That will, this was a player that stayed at Alabama to fight for every single snap that he got behind guys like Will Anderson and Dallas Turner. And that competitiveness and drive is going to help him at this level. Even with a smaller role last season, he still managed to come away with 8 sacks and 10.5 tackles for loss. So this guy can absolutely ball out. And now he gets the chance to show that more in practice and presumably in the preseason with Diaby sitting out. And I don't think, YaYa Diaby was going to have a ton of snaps in the preseason, but now those snaps are going to effectively be zero. So it's on Braswell and then Marquise Watts and Jose Ramirez to really fight it out for which player gets to be at the top of the rotation. Go back to that episode of In the Current on the Buccaneers YouTube channel that I mentioned on Wednesday. Evan brought it up again on yesterday's show. The Bucs talked about how they saw a lot of YaYa in Chris Braswell, from his skill set to his mentality to his work ethic. If he's going to have a window to really establish himself as a top option for Todd Bowles in this defense, that time is going to be right now. He has to take advantage. It's an unfortunate situation, but again, the Bucs avoided disaster with YaYa. Just an ankle sprain. He'll be able to come back. Hopefully he doesn't try to come back too soon. You need YaYa for the long stretch, not the short term. So, you want him to fully recover, but now all of those reps, all of those snaps, everything has been vacated. Chris Braswell really has a chance now to grab the reins and say, look, I know I'm a rookie, but I am here to make some noise, and I am here to be a big part of this defense. It's also worth noting that the Buccaneers officially placed guard Sua Opeta on injured reserve on Friday, and that they signed interior offensive lineman Jay Person. Now, Person was an undrafted free agent with the Patriots out of Appalachian State and the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. He was released in June. So Person, an undrafted rookie this year, is likely really just a training camp body. I'm not sure he ends up making the 53-man roster, especially with this late of a start, but he could also wind up on the practice squad if the Bucs like what they see. Ben Bredesen is going to be your starting left guard, but this also kind of opens up the door for rookie Elijah Klein to start to show that he could be an option. Maybe he's the one that starts to push Bredesen a little bit the way we thought Opeta was going to. Now, the Bucs just went through the whole rookie guard thing last year with Cody Mauch, and it might be better for the offense if you have a veteran next to Graham Barton on the interior of the line rather than two rookies and a second-year player making up that inside three of the offensive line. There's still some skilled depth players along the O-line for the Bucs, and a lot of them can play multiple positions. So I would be kind of surprised if Person makes the team right out of the gate, but he is a guy that is getting an opportunity. He's getting a chance, and he could find his way onto the roster by way of the practice squad before the season is over. Going to jump over into the chat real quick before we move on. Of course, Demon Hunter was in here from the jump, and I do have to bring this up again. Demon Hunter said in the chat, I need to ask a huge favor of you, James. Please make sure the crossover with David is live. I would love to make sure that crossover is live. However, with my daily schedule, with David's, covering the Commanders and being at all the practices and everything, I cannot make that promise. If we can work it out to be able to do the crossover live, I would love to do so. But I can't make any promises right now. I'll talk to David. We'll have to see how we can figure it out from a logistics standpoint of being able to go live on both channels simultaneously. But that could be a lot of fun. You guys would just have to promise to be nice to Commanders fans in the live chat. That's all I'm saying, because there would be a mixture of the fan bases there during a live crossover. We got Lakita in the chat. We got Narav in the chat. Slim Stank. Love seeing him in there. Let's see here. Let's see. We have Narav saying Watts also flashed at the end of last year. Good chance he takes a step this year. Yeah, we've talked about it quite a bit on this show. Marquise Watts is a guy that the Bucs and Jason Light and Todd Bowles are really high on, and so is Jose Ramirez. I know I keep bringing up his name, and there isn't a lot to go off of from last year, but believe me when I tell you, Jason Light and that crew were thrilled when they drafted him in 2023. He had to deal with injuries, had to kind of redshirt the year, but they really, really love what they saw out of Ramirez. And, he now has an opportunity as well to kind of sneak his way onto the field and steal some of these vacated reps away from guys like Braswell and Marquise Watts. The mailbag questions continue on the other side, like, who is my pick for Buccaneers MVP? That is next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Passion, drive, and patience, the formula for winning championships, is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, brakes, rotors, truck bed covers, anything that you think of, whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. It takes all the stress out of shopping for parts for your vehicle, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. So keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listener review every single day. Every dayers, make sure you are coming back on Monday. Plenty more to talk about regarding the Buccaneers and training camp. And starting Monday, we're leading up to a game. We will have an actual kind of almost football game to preview and talk about as the Bucs will take the field against the Cincinnati Bengals on Saturday, August 10th. So plenty to discuss there. But in the meantime, if you want the latest news from around all of sports, but you want to hear more of the national narratives and you want the biggest stories without fake, made-up, scripted screaming at one another, make the switch to Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today streams 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Insider Gabe wants me to pull out my crystal ball and predict the future, which we all know I have an immaculate, perfect record of doing. Every prediction I have ever made has come true, of course. Please don't fact check that. And he asks, who is your pick for the player that will end up as the Buccaneers MVP for 2024? And for those of you in the live chat, drop who you think is going to be the Bucs MVP in 2024, and I'll get to those in just a little bit. But that is genuinely a difficult question. The easy answer, the kind of the cop-out answer is, of course, Baker Mayfield, because quarterback is the most important player on the field, and your team is going to live and die by what the quarterback does. Then, of course, there's other kind of obvious players that I can go with, right? Mike Evans is going to be Mike Evans. Antoine Winfield Jr. is going to be Antoine Winfield Jr. Lavonte is always going to be Lavonte. Vita Vea is going to be a huge factor for the team. But I think the spirit of the question is which player that isn't one of those names that we already know is an important part or a leader or a captain on this team, which player is going to be one that we look at as having a huge impact on the Bucs season that you don't kind of expect. Like last year, it was Antoine, right? We all knew that Antoine was good, but no one expected that kind of season or that level of impact. We knew he was reliable. He was going to make plays, but to have a historically great season was something that kind of took everybody by surprise. So I'm looking at this as who is going to be this year's Antoine. And I think the answer to me is Chris Godwin. Godwin's return to the slot excuse me, is going to be so huge for this team. He already has the best hands of any receiver on the team, and it's going to be crucial for him to get off to a fast start. I think that's going to be kind of a focal point of Liam Cohen and probably Baker Mayfield after the slow start that Godwin got off to last year. But the Bucs offense was better when two things were happening. When Chris Godwin was getting involved and getting the football, and when Rachaad White was actually able to produce in the run game and was a part of the passing game. You add to that just the unbelievable start to training camp that Jalen McMillan is having. Another touchdown on Friday for Jalen McMillan. This time it was a one-handed catch. There's a huge arsenal of threats that the Buccaneers offense poses on each and every play. With Evans and McMillan on the outside, Godwin is primed to expose mismatches every snap. I don't think it's hyperbole to say that there is not a slot corner in the NFL that can stop Chris Godwin. There is not a matchup across the league with Godwin on the inside where anyone's going to say, woof, Chris is going to have a rough day today. It's just not going to happen. So teams are either going to have to double him out of the slot and leave Mike and Jalen one-on-one, or they're going to have to move one of their outside corners to the inside and play man and really shadow Chris wherever he goes. And that creates mismatches for Evans and McMillan on the outside. So I've talked a lot about how the run game is kind of the key to everything, right? That the threat of either Rashad or Bucky Irving to be able to run or catch creates problems for opposing defenses. It creates, it forces the defense to have to be honest. They can't just sit back in coverage and then pin their ears back and get after the quarterback because they know the Bucs can't run the ball. So that part of the game is still absolutely vital to the success of the Buccaneers. But Godwin could prove to be the single most valuable individual on offense by all the things he unlocks for everything around him. And speaking of the run game, speaking of Rashad and Bucky, let's not forget about having Godwin back inside. It helps the run game. Godwin is the best receiver on the team when it comes to blocking. So moving him there is also going to benefit Rashad and Bucky as the Bucs try to get this run game going. So Godwin is either going to cook these defenses, or the sheer threat that he brings and the attention that he garners is going to open things up for other playmakers in this offense. And when we look back on this season and we see that Godwin finished with 80 or 90 receptions, 1,000 yards again, and then 5 or 6 touchdowns, a number of which he has not hit since 2021, we're going to see what a crucial part of the team he was. And we're all going to keep our fingers crossed and really hope that Jason continues to cook and figures out a way to get Chris Godwin paid and keep him in Tampa. Going to jump into the live chat and see who you guys are picking for your MVP. We got Jordan in the chat. He says Chris Godwin. Black Crow Volume 2 says Kalijah Cansey. He was in consideration for me. I'm not going to lie to you. I thought about kind of who on offense, and it was Godwin or it was Rashad. And the more I thought about it, the more I leaned Chris Godwin. But defensively, the two names that really popped out to me were Kalijah Cansey and then KJ Britt. I felt that KJ Britt has the opportunity, and I'm not saying he was going to have like an Antoine level season, but his impact and what he can do at the inside linebacker spot, again, much like Chris on the offense, it opens up a lot of things for the Buccaneers defensively. So he was a guy that came to mind, but I love that pick of Kalijah Cansey. Really hope he has an incredible year this year. He has all the tools. He has the drive. He has the talent. It's just got to translate to the field and then hopefully injury-free. We got Demon Hunter in the chat says Sub-Zero is going to be MVP with 22 sacks. My goodness, Demon Hunter. I'm not ready to go that far. I would be happy with 12. You could shave 10 sacks off of that bold prediction, and I would be thrilled for the kind of season that YaYa Diaby had, averaging almost a sack per game. That would be huge. Jordan in the chat just says Eric Godwin. I love that. And then Destined for Greatness. Great to see you in the chat. I think Zion is going to make a huge jump this year. You know that I am fully in Zion's corner. That is my dude, and I expect some big things and a big jump for him as well. He could be he could have an Antoine level season in terms of his impact as a first year starter, and maybe not like the ridiculous takeaway numbers or the sacks or things like that, but his impact certainly can have a ripple effect through the defense, and we can be talking about him as one of the best players on the team come the end of the year. Stu J says 22 with an exclamation point. Demons bold prediction. All right. Well, we are going to play a little game of over under. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But with the playoffs being over, we get fewer games and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. This summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Right now, the Los Angeles Dodgers are the favorites to win the World Series at plus 320, while the Tampa Bay Rays have struggled mightily this season, and they are sitting at plus 29,000. If you'd rather get in on some NFL odds early on, the Chiefs and the Niners are tied atop the Super Bowl odds at plus 600, while the Bucs have dropped to plus 6,500 and are at plus 310 to win the NFC South. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Wrapping things up here on a live edition of the Locked On Bucs podcast. It's been a while since we've done a live. I'm loving what I'm seeing in the chat. Appreciate all of you guys coming through. Insider Mike hit me with a twofer, and that kind of inspired the mailbag episode, but he asked me who I thought the most underrated player in the NFL is and who I thought the most overrated player in the NFL was. And let's start with the underrated, and you all can call me a homer all you want, but I would venture to guess that you're all going to pretty much agree with me. But for the last decade, the most underrated player in the NFL has been Lavonte David. Early in his career, he was putting up incredible numbers and no one cared, because all they could do was talk about Luke Kuechly. It didn't matter that Lavonte was better in a lot of statistical categories. It didn't matter that Lavonte was just like Kuechly in terms of being a side-to-side linebacker, a sure tackler, a playmaker. Kuechly got all the hype. He got all the praise. He got all the attention, all the accolades, all the awards. And it didn't help the fact that Lavonte was on crap teams while Kuechly was on a Panthers team that was competing pretty much year in and year out with bum Cam Newton at quarterback. But then even after Kuechly, Lavonte still didn't get his due. There was always other linebackers that got all the attention. Bobby Wagner comes to mind. Oh my goodness, I'm forgetting his name, from the 49ers. There's been a couple of 49ers linebackers that have gotten a lot more attention than Lavonte has. And shoot, Lavonte even got overlooked for a little while in favor of players on his own team. Quan Alexander got a lot of national attention. Devin White, of course, got a lot of national attention. And, they got a lot of praise and a lot of hype. And Lavonte was still the sure guy. He was still the more reliable linebacker, whether they were talking about Quan or Devin. Now, he finally got a little bit of well-deserved attention during the Brady years, but he's never really talked about among the best linebackers in the league. He's one of the best defensive players in Bucs history. He could wind up breaking even more of Derek Brooks' records before he's done, and he might wind up at the top of a lot of these all-time lists for Tampa Bay by the time he decides to hang it up. But again, it doesn't seem to matter. So he's just going to continue being the absolute beast that he is while most of the outside world ignores him. And I think kind of the most frustrating part for me about all of this is that Lavonte David has had a Hall of Fame career. He's put up Hall of Fame numbers, but when it comes to be his time to be eligible and to be discussed among the voters for the Pro Football Hall of Fame, he's not going to make it. His fate is going to be in the hands of the same people that overlook him year after year after year. And it's honestly a travesty that he won't ever get the recognition, the immortality that he earned and that he deserves. So I will die on that hill that Lavonte David is the most underrated player in the NFL and has been basically his whole career. As for my most overrated player, that's a much tougher question because there are players across the league that I don't particularly care for. There are players that I'm sick of hearing about because, the national media just never stops gushing gushing over them. But ultimately, I think a lot of the players that they do gush over, even though it's kind of overkill, a lot of it is warranted. I mean, Patrick Mahomes is incredible. Lamar Jackson is an absolute freak. Christian McCaffrey is unreal. Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, Sauce Gardner, TJ Watt, all of these dudes are amazing. So for me, it kind of came down to two players. When I read the question for Mike, I had two guys immediately come to mind. And one was Myles Garrett, who I think gets way too much hype. He was inexplicably given Defensive Player of the Year over TJ Watt, and he only had one sack in the final 6 weeks of the season. He's a great player, but the hype machine was a little too much, and he disappeared for basically a third of the year and still got rewarded for it. It just never sat well with me. But with that said, I started thinking about it a little bit more, and I don't think he's the most overrated player in the NFL. He's absolutely great. And if the Bucs got him, they'd immediately become one of the most feared defenses in the NFL. So my frustration, my recency bias and frustration over the Defensive Player of the Year stuff was kind of clouding my judgment. I removed myself from that, and then I removed him from contention. So that leaves the other player that immediately came to mind, and it's Dak Prescott. Why are people still hyping this guy up like he's a top 5 quarterback in the NFL? This is a player that, he was great last year. He was great. His touchdown to interception ratio was outstanding. Over 4,000 yards for the third time of his career. Almost a 70% completion percentage. That's fantastic. Kudos to him. But then let's take a step back and remember that he has played with Dez Bryant, Zeke Elliott, Jason Witten, Amari Cooper, Michael Gallup, Tavon Austin, Tony Pollard, CeeDee Lamb. He's had top 5 defenses. For most of his career, his division was a disaster. And what has he done with it? 5 playoff appearances. 3 one-and-dones. Nowhere close to even sniffing an NFC championship game. He has done nothing but waste all the unbelievable talent around him on both sides of the ball in Dallas and has never been able to get the job done. I'm not saying he's bad, but he's overrated based on the simple fact that he's hyped up as this Hall of Fame franchise-altering superhero, and they're talking about him as potentially being the highest-paid quarterback in the league when he gets his next deal, but all the while, he has wasted so much talent and so much opportunity in Dallas that he hasn't even been able to get them back to a conference championship because they would either implode under his leadership in the regular season and miss the playoffs entirely, or they would choke against inferior talent in the postseason. So that's my answer. Dak Prescott, quarterback of the Dallas Cowboys, is the single most overrated player in the NFL, and that is a hill that I am also willing to die on. And I know some of you may say, but James, Aaron Rodgers has only been to 1 Super Bowl, and he's touted as an all-time great. And that's absolutely a fair point. He was also kind of a thought in the back of my mind that every year he puts up these Herculean numbers in the regular season, and then they've never been able to get it done. Well, I shouldn't say never. They got the job done once, but year in and year out, they're hosting the NFC Championship game in one of the toughest places in the NFL to play, and they lose every time. They lose to the Niners, they lose to the Seahawks, they lose to the Bucs. They just always seem to find a way to, blow every opportunity that they've had. Gonna jump into the chat again. Destined for greatness. Yes. I'm sorry. I don't know how to pronounce his name. I think it's Mirov, at My Sports Update on Twitter. He just put out a new show talking about underrated players, and Lavonte David was his first guest. He said David is the definition of underrated, and I haven't watched the show yet, but as soon as I saw kind of the premise of the show and his first guest, I immediately just applauded right there in the middle of a grocery store. And everybody looked at me like I was insane. But yeah, it's nice that people are kind of shining a light on that. Gonna see here in the chat who you guys think the most overrated players are. We got Narav saying Cousins overrated. His earnings don't match his production. I do agree with that. We got Demon Hunter says neither does Jordan Love, but Green Bay paid him like he was the best. That my stepson is a huge Packers fan, and he was talking about how if Jordan Love plays, over the course of this contract, the way he did the second half of last season, it's going to be worth it. And I turned around and I said it was way too much money for a guy that has started 1 year in the NFL, and there's just as good of a chance that he plays as poorly as he did the first half of last year as there is that he played as well the second half of last year. Like those are both within the realm of possibility there, and the Packers are going to regret that contract if it was indeed more of the first half of last year. Destined for greatness. Cousins definitely feels incredibly overrated. Narav says Google says Kirk's career earnings sit at $231 million. That's insane. That's insane that this man has gotten $231 million for what? For what? Oh my goodness. It just makes me laugh even more at the idiocy that everyone is all aboard the Falcons train because of Kirk Cousins when the dude has, you could make the argument that Kirk Cousins has wasted as much talent as Dak has. Now, I don't think his defense in Minnesota was as good as the defenses that Dak has had in Dallas, but my goodness, that dude got to play with Stephon Diggs, Dalvin Cook, and Justin Jefferson and still couldn't win? Come on, man. Last one. I like this one from Jordan. He says Deshaun Watson equals bum. That seems to be becoming more and more true by the year. I know a lot of Browns fans regret that trade and they wish they still had Baker Mayfield. Stu is hitting the road. Raise the flags, go Bucs. Stu, safe travels. Enjoy the weekend. Enjoy the wedding. Hope everything goes really, really well. And then finally, Ryan in the chat says, I think Josh Allen is overrated. Now, I'm going to assume that you mean the quarterback and not the defensive end or the edge rusher. I'm going to disagree to a certain extent. And he's had his issues in the postseason too. There's no doubt about it. But I think if I'm starting a franchise right now today and I have my choice of quarterbacks, I'm definitely taking Josh Allen well before Dak Prescott. I think he's a quarterback that can win a Super Bowl. I think they've just continuously run into a dynasty and a juggernaut in the Kansas City Chiefs. They ran into a red hot Cincinnati Bengals team. Fortune has not favored the Bills. And I don't know, maybe they really are cursed. We're talking about the team that lost 4 consecutive Super Bowls. But I can see how you would believe that Josh Allen is overrated, and I won't argue the point too much. I just think, in my own personal opinion, I think he's pretty much talked about in the same way that he should be. But that is going to do it for this episode. Again, thank you all for joining in the live chat. I've missed doing this. I have missed interacting with all of you. It's always a great time. Please check out everything going on over at bucksnation.com. Become a Locked On Bucs insider. You can chat via text with me one-on-one, no ads or anything like that. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes. Make sure you are subscribed on YouTube with the notifications turned on. Subscribe on your podcast platform of choice. And of course, you can follow on Twitter at LockedOnBucs, at @Yarcho_Bucs. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding weekend. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.